She was just a child, barefoot, freezing, dragging her baby brother through a snowstorm, running from a father who should have protected them. Her mother collapsed in the woods, bruised and broken, too weak to go on. No one came. No one even knew they were missing, until a retired war medic and his old canine partner felt something in the wind and followed it. What happened next will melt the ice around your heart. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe children and animals deserve warmth, not fear, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. In the depths of a Montana winter, the forest didn't whisper, it roared. Just outside the remote edges of Pine Hollow, the trees stood draped in white silence, shivering under layers of hoarfrost. The wind cut sideways through the mountains, carrying the cold deep into the lungs of anything still breathing. Snow blanketed the dirt trails, the branches, the world-erasing direction, muffling sound, and burying the last signs of hope. Harper Miller was only 7, but already looked like a ghost of herself. She staggered through the thick snow, barefoot, each step a sharp stab of ice. Her thin frame trembled inside a torn red cotton dress, dotted with faded flower patterns. The dress was ripped at the sleeves and hem from scrambling through underbrush. Mud and blood clung to its fabric. Her legs were scratched, her knees purple with bruises. Her skin, pale and wind-burnt, showed where the frost had bitten her. Her golden hair, once carefully braided by her mother each morning, now fell in tangled, frozen strands down her cheeks and into her mouth. Dirt streaked her face, a dried line of blood crusting above her left brow. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. In her arms, wrapped in a damp kitchen towel and her mother's old coat, was her baby brother, Luke. Just over 3 weeks old, so small he barely seemed to breathe. Every few steps she whispered, "Don't fall asleep, baby. I'm your blanket. I'm your furnace." Behind her, Madison Miller. Her mother dragged herself through the snow, one foot dragging more than stepping. Madison was 34 years old, once a literature teacher known for her softness and empathy, the kind of woman who wrote poetry in margins and cried quietly during children's recitals. But that version of her had vanished over the last year, lost to the bruises, the threats, the endless nights of trembling next to a man who could no longer be called a husband. Madison was tall and willowy, but now frail, her cheeks hollow, her lips cracked. Her once auburn hair was matted beneath a thin scarf, and a dark bruise bloomed along the right side of her jaw. She had tried to keep them warm. She had tried to make it to the highway. But the forest was longer than she thought, the storm crueler. "I just need to—" Madison gasped before falling. She collapsed beside a crooked pine, legs buckling, arms reaching blindly for her children. Her breath was shallow. Her voice was gone. Harper dropped to her knees, snow burying her shins. She leaned close. "Mom, please get up. We still have to walk. You said we were close." But Madison didn't answer. Her lips had turned pale blue. Harper curled around Luke, trying to cover both him and her mother with the thin coat. Her body shook uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. She reached into the coat's inside pocket and pulled out the silver locket her mother always wore. It was cracked now, the clasp barely holding. The photo inside was missing, but the chain still smelled like lavender oil and old paper. She clutched it tight to her chest. Somewhere far away, perhaps miles, an old man stirred his coffee beside a cabin window. Eli Whitmore, 71, stood wrapped in a thick Army-issue coat, his eyes narrowed at the swirling snow outside. He was a tall man, though his posture had hunched with time. His hair was mostly white now, cropped short, and his face lined with scars earned from both war and time. A retired combat medic, Eli had served 3 tours overseas and had lost more than comrades during those years. He had lost faith in the system, in people, in purpose. That was, until he found her. Birtta stood beside him, tail still, eyes alert. A 12-year-old German shepherd, once part of a canine unit in Afghanistan, Birtta had been abandoned after injury. Her front right paw had a slight limp from an old bone fracture, and she bore a long, faded scar along her ribcage. When Eli adopted her 7 years ago from a shelter slated for euthanasia, the handler had said, "She's past her prime, not much left in her." Eli had looked into the dog's amber eyes and seen something else entirely. He named her Birtta, from the Finnish word Birtta, meaning light bringer, because the day she entered his life was the first day light returned to his cabin after decades of silence. She had saved him long before she ever saved anyone else. Now, standing by the fire, Birtta suddenly raised her head. Her ears twitched. She stepped toward the door. Eli followed her movement, frowning. "What is it, girl?" Birtta walked to the front window, then to the door, then back again. She let out a low huff. It wasn't a bark. It was something else. An unsettled urgency. Eli set down his cup. "You've got that look again," he muttered. He pulled on his gloves and grabbed the thermos from the counter. Birtta whined softly as he opened the door. Snow burst inward with the wind. He squinted into the pale storm. All right. Let's walk. Just for a bit." The door closed behind them. Back in the clearing, Harper adjusted Luke's head against her chest. His breathing was shallow but present. Her fingers were nearly numb now, her feet beyond feeling. She leaned over Madison, brushing hair from her forehead. "Don't die," she whispered. "Please don't die." Above them, the pines creaked beneath their icy coats, and somewhere, not far off, a dog stepped through the snow with her nose low to the ground, drawn by something neither man nor beast could explain, only feel. In the waning light of late afternoon, a hush fell over the snowy hills surrounding Pine Hollow. Montana's winters had no mercy, no soft beauty, no storybook charm, just a cold that gnawed bone deep, and a silence that could bury you. On a slope above the frozen valley, a man moved through the snow with a slow but steady gait, his boots pressing deep into the drifts. His breath escaped in bursts of steam. Eli Whitmore, 71, was a man carved from mountain stone in years of war. Tall but slightly stooped, he walked with the rhythm of someone who had long accepted pain as a companion. His hair, once a dense dark brown, was now white and closely cropped. His beard was thick, his features weathered, with deep-set eyes that had seen the worst the world could throw. He wore a faded army coat, patched at the elbows, a thermal shirt beneath, and heavy canvas pants tucked into worn boots that had seen decades of winter. He was alone, but not truly. Beside him, moving with low, purposeful energy, trotted Birtta. The 12-year-old German shepherd bore the quiet confidence of an old soldier. Her black and tan coat had dulled with age, and a slight hitch in her step remained from an injury sustained years ago in Afghanistan, an old bone fracture that never healed clean. A long, faint scar stretched across her right flank, barely visible beneath her winter fur. Yet even with the signs of time, her presence carried weight. Her amber eyes were sharp, observant, and filled with a silent knowing. She was the kind of dog that didn't bark unless it mattered. Eli had once told someone that Birtta didn't follow him, she read him, and today, she had been reading something else entirely. Birtta had stopped moving 20 minutes ago. One moment, she had been sniffing the trail as usual. The next, she froze, ears pricked forward, tail stiffened, nose lifted against the wind. Something had changed. Eli slowed behind her. "What is it, girl?" She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly, and she took 2 slow steps forward. Then another. Then she growled, low and brief. A sound of focus, not fear. That's when he knew. Something was out there. He glanced around the clearing. Nothing moved but the wind through the trees. The pines stood tall and hushed, as if they too were listening. The snow beneath his boots was fresh and unbroken. No tracks, no signs. But Birtta was never wrong. "All right," he muttered, adjusting his scarf. "Let's take a look." Birtta didn't wait. She turned south, heading down a lesser-used trail that cut across the ridge toward the lower valley. Eli followed, his knees aching with every step. The cold bit through his coat, but he didn't complain. Birtta was moving faster now, nose low, her breath steaming from flared nostrils. Every so often she would stop and sniff the air, then move again, cutting across the trees like she was tracing a memory in the wind. As they walked, Eli's thoughts wandered not to the present, but to a night long past, not the day he named Birtta. That had been a good day, and he didn't like good memories. They stung too much. No, this was a night just weeks after he brought her home from the shelter. She had curled at the foot of his bed, trembling. She didn't whimper loudly, just soft, breathless shudders that barely stirred the silence. Eli had watched from the edge of the mattress, unsure what to do with something so broken and afraid. So he reached down, laid a hand on her ribs, and whispered, "You stay, and I'll stay. That's the deal." She had stilled then. She never cried again. Now that same dog was leading him towards something in the snow that reeked of fear and fragility. They moved another half-mile down the trail, the trees beginning to thin as they neared the lip of a shallow ravine. The snow here was untouched, but Birtta's body language shifted again. Her ears twitched. She turned in a tight circle, then stopped completely, nose in the air, one long sniff. Then she sat. Eli knew what that meant. The trail ended here, but the story didn't. He joined her side, resting one knee in the snow, panting lightly. "You smell it?" he asked, more to confirm than to question. Birtta responded with a single soft huff, her eyes locked toward the east. Eli scanned the horizon. It was hard to see much, just a long stretch of trees and the faint curve of a snowy basin. No shapes, no sound. But Birtta wasn't interested in what they could see. She was listening to something deeper. "I'm not going to make you track blind in the dark," Eli said quietly, rubbing her shoulder. "We wait." He stood, brushing snow from his gloves, and looked up the hill. From this angle, through a narrow pocket in the trees, he could just barely make out the flicker of his cabin lantern, the old brass one Annie gave him years ago. It hung from the porch beam, always lit in the winter months. She used to tease him about it. "You're the last man on this mountain who still believes in lighthouses." Maybe she was right. But maybe, tonight, someone else needed a light. He reached down and tapped Birtta's collar. "Let's go back, girl. We head out again at first light." Birtta hesitated, glancing once more down the ridge. Then she stood, shaking the snow from her coat, and fell in beside him as they turned toward home. Somewhere far below, beneath the trees, buried in the white and the wind, a little girl with golden hair and bare feet clutched her baby brother and waited for the world to notice. The lantern on Eli's porch swung gently in the wind, its flame burning steady through the darkness. The wind had calmed, though the cold still clawed at everything it touched. Dawn had not yet broken, but a soft bluish light had begun to pool across the snow. Eli Whitmore moved carefully down the slope, guided not by sight, but by Birtta, his 12-year-old German shepherd, who trotted ahead with intent. Her breath came out in thin bursts. Her body was low, cautious, but certain. They had doubled back before first light, retracing the trail from the night before. Birtta had led without hesitation, her movements sharper now, as if the urgency had grown overnight. Eli, tall and wrapped in layers of thermal wool and weather-worn canvas, carried a pack slung across his back. Inside were first aid supplies, thermal blankets, water, and a flask of broth, things he hadn't packed in years, things he hoped he wouldn't need. His fingers were stiff with cold, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning every dip in the terrain, every branch, every mound. They crested the ridge and began their descent into the shallow basin where Birtta had paused the night before. She was ahead of him now by 20 yards. Then she stopped, frozen. Eli slowed. Birtta stood in a stillness so complete it seemed holy. Her tail was neutral, her ears tilted forward. She stepped once, then twice, toward a snow-covered shape huddled near a crooked pine. Then she lay down, not submissively, but gently, her body curled forward, ears lowered. Eli's heart hammered. He moved closer, crunching through the snow, and saw them. A child small, fragile sat hunched in the white, her arms wrapped around a bundled shape. Her blonde hair was tangled and frozen against her cheeks. Her red dress was torn and crusted with ice. Her feet were bare, legs blue with frostbite. Dirt streaked her cheeks. A locket dangled from her tiny fingers. Harper Miller did not move when she saw the dog approach. Her arms instinctively tightened around her baby brother Luke, the infant wrapped in the only coat they had. She stared at the large animal in silence, her breath ragged. Her brown eyes, wide with exhaustion, flicked from the dog to the man emerging from the trees. She didn't scream. She just held her ground. Birtta crept forward another step and sat again, her amber eyes locked with Harper's. Then she did something Harper didn't expect. She lay down in the snow, resting her head on her paws. Waiting. Harper blinked. Her arms trembled. Her body screamed from cold. But she felt something shift in her chest. A thread of warmth, faint and unfamiliar, uncoiled in her gut. The dog wasn't going to hurt her. It was protecting her. Eli stopped a few steps away. He crouched slowly, his eyes assessing everything. Harper, the baby, and the figure lying motionless in the snow beside them. A woman, mid-30s, pale, barely breathing. "Don't be afraid," he said gently, his voice low and cracked from the cold. "I'm not here to hurt you. I promise." Harper looked up. Is she going to die?" Eli shifted toward the woman Madison Miller. He reached carefully, pressing 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse, weak, sluggish. But there. "She's alive," he said. "And no, she's not going to die today. Not if I can help it." Harper stared at him, unsure if she believed. "Are you a doctor?" "I was once," Eli answered. "In the army, long time ago." He looked her over more carefully now. Her hands were nearly blue, her fingers swollen. Luke wasn't crying, just barely breathing. The situation was worse than he feared. "We need to get you out of here," he said. Birtta stood, watching silently, then padded closer to Harper. She sniffed gently near Luke's head. Harper flinched but didn't pull away. "She's not going to bite you," Eli said. "Her name's Birtta. She's trained, smarter than most people I know." Harper's lip quivered. "Birtta, she's here for you," Eli added, then gently placed a thick wool scarf around Harper's shoulders. "So am I." Eli pulled a thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around the baby first. Then he carefully checked Madison again. She was unconscious, but her breath had stabilized. He opened a bottle of warm broth from the flask and slowly offered it to Harper. She took it without a word and drank in slow, small sips. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "I've got a sled, not far. We'll go slow." Eli took Luke in one arm, cradling the baby close to his chest to share body heat. Then he scooped Madison up over his shoulder, grunting softly with the effort. She was light, too light, malnourished. He looked down at Harper. "Stay close to Birtta, all right? She won't let anything happen to you." Harper nodded. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. "She won't die, right?" Eli looked at the girl. He saw something in her, something hollow and brave. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and steady. "No," he said, "not on my watch." They moved slowly, with Birtta leading the way and Harper walking close beside. The wind had quieted. The storm had passed. Only the deep hush of snowfall remained as they left behind the place where hope had nearly been buried. The fog was beginning to rise as they climbed back through the forest. The weight of silence draped over the trees like a curtain. Eli Whitmore drove the ATV slowly, careful not to jolt the crude wooden sled tied behind. The sled, made of weathered oak and steel runners, rattled gently over the snowpack. On it lay Madison Miller, still unconscious, her face pale beneath the fleece blanket Eli had wrapped around her. Harper sat curled beside her mother, arms wrapped around Luke, who now slept swaddled in 2 layers of flannel and wool. Birtta walked alongside the ATV with tireless vigilance, occasionally glancing back at the sled as if to reassure herself the cargo was still safe. The sun had fully risen, though its light was muted behind thick cloud. The trail to the cabin twisted between pine trunks and led them out of the deeper woods into a shallow clearing. There, tucked between 2 large boulders and nearly invisible from the air, stood Eli's home, a 1-story timber cabin with a sloped metal roof and a wraparound porch half buried in snow. Smoke drifted from a short chimney, curling upward into the fog like a question searching for an answer. Eli pulled the ATV beside the porch and cut the engine. The quiet returned instantly. He stepped off, joints stiff, then turned to the sled. "All right, let's get you inside," he muttered. Birtta was already circling toward the front door, tail high, nose checking the air. Harper didn't speak. She just watched Eli lift her mother with care, her thin arms dangling, her head leaning against his shoulder like a rag doll. He moved slowly, but surely, kicking open the front door and stepping inside. The warmth of the interior hit him like a wave. The cabin was small but functional. A narrow living space with a stone fireplace on one side, a battered leather couch, and a wooden table in the center. Beyond the sitting area was a short hallway leading to a single bedroom and a closet-sized bath. The air smelled of cinnamon, pine, and something earthy cedar oil, perhaps. and the fire crackled softly in the hearth. Eli laid Madison on his bed, pulling extra blankets over her before checking her pulse and breath again. Still shallow, but steady. Her body was beginning to warm. Her lips, once blue, now carried a faint flush. He placed a warm compress beneath her hands and turned to Harper. "You hungry?" he asked, voice gentle. Harper stood in the doorway, clutching Luke. Her cheeks were still streaked with grime, her eyes heavy with fear and exhaustion. She looked at Eli, then shook her head. "She needs help more than me." Eli gave a quiet nod. "She's getting it. You should too." He walked over, taking Luke carefully from her arms. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Eli held him close and handed Harper a folded wool blanket. "Sit by the fire, let me show you something." Harper followed him without a word. He knelt by the hearth and pulled a small wooden chest from beneath the couch. Inside were vials of solution, gauze, syringes, and an old field medic's kit, neatly labeled, preserved with the reverence of someone who had lived and died by its contents. Eli selected an IV bag, attached the line, and prepared a needle. "Do you know what you're doing?" Harper asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Eli said. "This isn't my first rescue." He inserted the IV into Madison's arm with practiced ease, taping it into place before adjusting her blankets. He placed a small battery-powered heart monitor beside the bed, watching the blinking line flicker slowly, then stabilize. When he was sure Madison was holding on, he returned to Harper, who had curled up in the armchair near the fire with the blanket drawn over her knees. Birtta lay beside her, head on her front paws, eyes closed but ears still twitching at every creak. Luke had been laid gently in a makeshift cradle, an old wooden laundry basket padded with towels and set near the hearth. Birtta shifted, stretched, and rested her body along the basket's side, her thick coat radiating warmth. Harper watched this silently. Then, for the first time since they met, she spoke without fear. "She's guarding him." Eli looked over his shoulder. "She does that." "Why?" Harper asked. "She knows what it's like to lose someone." Harper blinked at the firelight. Her eyelids were heavy. Her hands, once clenched into fists, now lay open in her lap. Her fingers held her mother's cracked locket, wrapped tightly in her palm. "Will she stay there?" Harper murmured. Eli pulled another blanket from the couch and draped it gently across the girl's shoulders. "She'll stay as long as he needs her, and longer if you do." Birtta shifted slightly, pressing her body closer to the basket. Her breath was slow, rhythmic. Harper's eyes began to close, her body sagging deeper into the chair. Eli crouched beside her. "You're safe here," he said softly. "All of you." Her lips parted. "Promise?" He reached out, placed a hand gently on her shoulder and nodded. "I promise." Harper didn't respond. Her breathing slowed. She had fallen asleep, still holding the broken locket, the chain tangled between her fingers. Outside the windows, the mist had thickened again, blanketing the trees and hiding the past behind a wall of white. Inside, the fire cracked. Birtta stood watch, and for the first time in days, silence no longer meant danger. It meant peace. The fire had died down to a warm bed of glowing coals, casting soft orange hues against the cabin walls. Outside, the fog remained thick and unmoving, hugging the windows like a silent guardian. Inside, the air was heavy with quiet breath, interrupted only by the occasional creak of timber or a shift from the large German shepherd who lay curled beside the makeshift cradle. Birta's eyes were closed, but her ears flicked with every sound. She had slept like this for years, never fully, always on the edge of alert. And tonight, something changed. A sound, barely audible, caught in the edge of her awareness. It wasn't a noise that belonged in dreams. It was real, short, sharp, a break in breathing. She rose, ears forward, tail low, moving silently to the cradle. Luke, the infant wrapped in flannel and wool, was no longer breathing in smooth, steady puffs. His lips had turned a bluish tint, his chest still. Then came the whimper, thin and weak. Birtta barked once, sharp, loud. The sound sliced through the stillness. Eli jolted awake. He was in the armchair beside the hearth, where he had dozed off with a wool blanket over his lap. Years of military sleep patterns meant he never sank too deep. He was on his feet in seconds, the blanket falling behind him. Harper stirred in the opposite chair, rubbing her eyes. "What's wrong?" she mumbled. But Eli was already kneeling by the cradle. His hands swept aside the towel and pressed lightly against the baby's chest. No cry, no warmth. His pulse kicked into overdrive. He lifted Luke gently but firmly, cradling the baby in his arm while using the other to reach into his emergency bag. He pulled out a small, flexible resuscitation mask, something he had kept all these years, never expecting to use again. "Stay back, Harper," he said, calm but firm. "I need space." Harper froze. Her face was pale in the dim firelight, hands trembling. Birtta stood beside her like a statue, not moving, not making a sound. Eli laid Luke on the couch cushion, tilted the infant's head back slightly, and began neonatal CPR. 2 gentle puffs of air into the mask, then 2 fingers compressing a tiny chest. 1 and 2 and breathe, he whispered, the rhythm automatic from memory. "Come on, little man. Stay with me." Harper pressed her back to the wall, arms locked around her knees. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. She couldn't cry now. Not now. Madison stirred in the bedroom. Her fingers twitched beneath the blankets. A faint groan escaped her lips. Luke let out a weak cry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong. But it was enough. Eli exhaled and scooped the baby back into his arms, holding him close to his chest to transfer warmth. "That's it, kid. Keep fighting." From the bedroom, a voice fragile and hoarse broke through the stillness. "Luke?" Eli turned. Madison stood in the bedroom doorway, barefoot, leaning heavily on the frame. Her long auburn hair was tangled against her cheeks, her face still pale but now flushed with life. Her body wavered, weak from fever and exhaustion, but her eyes, green and wide, were locked on her baby. "He's all right," Eli said, stepping forward. "He had a bad moment, but he's all right now." Madison took 1 shaky step into the room, then another. Harper was already at her side, holding her arm. "He saved Luke," Harper whispered. "He really saved him." Madison's legs gave out before she reached the couch. Eli caught her beneath the arms, gently lowering her to the chair. She reached for her son, cradling him like something sacred, her breath catching as tears streamed down her cheeks. I thought he was gone." Eli crouched beside her, resting one hand on the edge of the cushion. "Not on my watch." Madison looked at him, studying his weathered face, the streaks of gray in his beard, the calm steadiness in his eyes. "You're just a stranger. We walked into your life like ghosts in the snow. You walked in like people who needed saving," he said. "That's never been something I ignore." She brushed a hand over Luke's soft head, her fingers trembling. "Thank you. I don't even know your full name." "Eli Whitmore," he replied. "Used to be staff sergeant, now just a man with a cabin and a dog." At that, Birtta stepped forward, placing her chin gently on the edge of the cushion beside Luke. Madison blinked, then let out a tired laugh between tears. "She's beautiful." "She's the reason we found you," Eli said. "She knew before I did. She always does." Harper knelt beside her mother, still holding her necklace, still watching Luke's chest rise and fall. Then she looked at Madison and whispered, "We're alive, right? For real this time." Madison turned her head, pressing her lips to her daughter's temple. "Yes, baby, we're alive." Harper placed one hand gently on her mother's chest, feeling the steady thump beneath her palm. "We made it." The fire crackled. The storm had passed. Outside, the mist had thinned enough for moonlight to reach the frost-glazed trees. Inside, 3 people and a dog leaned into the warmth, not just of the hearth, but of a moment that had been earned through silence, pain, and a kind of love that wasn't loud but unshakable. By the 3rd morning, the cabin had shifted from emergency shelter to something softer and in-between space, where silence was no longer dangerous, and breath no longer curled from frost. The snow had stopped falling. Outside, sunlight filtered through a break in the clouds, illuminating the pine trees in a golden mist. Inside, the scent of cedarwood and cinnamon lingered, mixing with the warm comfort of freshly brewed coffee and the soft creaking of old floorboards. Harper had taken to exploring every nook of the cabin like a secret map. With her mother still resting and Luke sleeping soundly in a real crib Eli had pulled down from the attic, a simple wooden frame once used by neighbors decades ago, she wandered quietly, barefoot, wrapped in an oversized knit sweater Eli had offered. It hung off her shoulders like a blanket, and the sleeves fell past her hands, but she liked it that way. The attic ladder was old and stiff, folding down from a panel in the ceiling with a wooden rod. Eli had warned her not to go up without him, but she had asked so gently, he gave in. "Just don't fall through the floorboards," he had said, then added with a wink, "and don't bring back any ghosts." The attic smelled like dust and pine resin. It wasn't tall. Harper could barely stand upright, but it was filled with forgotten things. A box of mismatched boots, 3 broken chairs, a stack of old hunting magazines, and, in the farthest corner beneath a faded quilt, a wooden box no bigger than a suitcase. It was unmarked. The latch clicked softly when she opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes tied together with twine, yellowed with time. Some had stamps. Others were folded pieces of paper, the ink faded, but still legible. At the very top was a photograph, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. A woman stood in front of a schoolhouse door, waving, smiling with sun in her eyes. She wore a long cardigan, a flowing skirt, and a name tag that read Anna Whitmore. Harper recognized the eyes immediately. They were Eli's. She climbed down with the box, struggling with the weight, but determined. Back in the living room, Madison sat on the edge of the armchair, her hair tied back loosely, her cheeks no longer pale, but flushed from warmth and a bowl of oatmeal. Her sweater was Eli's as well, far too big, and her bare feet were tucked beneath a woolen throw. She looked up as Harper approached, tilting her head. "What you got there, honey?" "I found it in the attic." Harper placed the box on the table and opened the lid. "It's his." Madison leaned in, curious. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the bundle of letters. She glanced toward the bedroom where Eli had gone to refill the generator. She opened the top letter carefully, as if it might crumble. The handwriting was delicate and sweeping. "Dearest Eli, the children asked me today why I wear your old dog tag on my necklace. I told them it was to remember someone brave. But the truth is, I wear it to remember what love looks like when it's quiet and full of dirt and hard work." Madison's eyes clouded. She read silently for several minutes, then turned to the photo. Her fingers hovered above it. When she spoke, her voice cracked. "Oh my God, I know this woman." Harper blinked. "You do?" "She was my teacher when I was 7. Her name was Mrs. Whitmore." Madison stared at the photo, lips parted. "She taught reading and poetry. She was kind. Her voice was soft like rain. I remember she always brought a thermos of chamomile tea and shared it with the janitor." Harper tilted her head. "You remember that?" Madison nodded. "I remember everything about her. I even remember the poem she wrote on the chalkboard the last day of school." She looked at Harper, wide-eyed. "I had no idea." Eli entered then, wiping his hands on a rag. The heater should hold another few hours. He paused, noticing the open box. He didn't speak immediately. Just stood in the doorway, lips pressed into a soft line. Madison stood, holding the photo. "Eli, she was my teacher." Eli exhaled, long and slow, then stepped forward. "She always wanted to go back to teaching, but her health started to go before she got the chance." Madison's voice trembled. "She changed me, the way she treated kids, like they mattered even when they were scared or angry." "She believed in them," Eli said, sitting down across from her. "Believed in you, sounds like." Harper had been listening quietly. Then she reached for a piece of paper from Eli's shelf and scribbled something quickly with a dull pencil. Her brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, she handed the note to Eli. It was a poem, scrawled in crooked letters and simple rhymes. She walks through snow with silent steps, a shadow soft, a tail that sweeps. She guards the ones who cannot cry and keeps their tiny hearts from sleep. She lies beside the coldest fear and makes it melt by simply near toi. Birtta, the keeper of the storm, who made the frozen cabin warm. Eli read it once, then twice. The sky above the forest had taken on that strange shade of gray that always came before a heavy snow. Not yet falling, but waiting, suspended like held breath. The wind whispered against the branches, and the trees swayed with the quiet creaks of time. It had been nearly a week since Eli brought the family into his cabin, and while the crisis had passed, a lingering uncertainty hung in the air. Harper, now familiar with every creak of the floor and every corner of the cabin, had taken to watching the horizon from the porch. Wrapped in Eli's old wool coat frayed at the sleeves, but still warm, she scanned the sky with eyes far too aged for someone only 6 years old. She had hung the bell herself, a thick bronze dinner bell they'd found in the tool shed. its handle rusted and rope frayed, but still functional. With Eli's help, they tied it high onto the bent limb of a pine tree, its height just enough to catch wind and draw attention. That morning, the sound of choppers sliced through the silence. Harper didn't hesitate. She ran, feet slipping slightly on the snow-packed path. She grabbed the rope and yanked with all her strength. The bell groaned once, then sang out clear and deep, echoing across the valley like a call from another time. Again she rang it, and again. Eli appeared behind her moments later, startled. "Harper, what?" "Helicopters," she said breathlessly. "I saw them." Eli looked up. 3 dark shapes passed low against the clouds, heading west. Search and rescue. He hadn't expected them to search this deep into the timberline, but someone had. The choppers circled back. Within 20 minutes, the hum of rotors returned, louder, more deliberate. A red and white rescue helicopter hovered over a clearing a few hundred yards from the cabin. Moments later, boots crunched through the snow, and a team of 4 in heavy parkas emerged, snow-dusted on their shoulders, helmets still on. The man in the lead was broad-shouldered, late 40s, with a weathered face and deep lines around his eyes. His name tag read Sergeant M. Ramirez. He lifted his visor as he approached and froze when he saw Eli. "Captain Whitmore," he said, voice cracking. "Is that really, sir?" Eli blinked, recognition dawning slowly. "Ramirez?" The younger man dropped his gear and stepped forward, eyes glassy. "You pulled me out of Kandahar. I was bleeding out behind that jeep. You dragged me all the way back through enemy fire. I never thought I'd get to repay that." He looked down at Harper, who stood slightly behind Eli, clutching the coat tighter. "And now you're saving people again." Eli smiled faintly, resting a hand on Ramirez's shoulder. "I guess I don't know how to stop." Madison emerged from the cabin just then, holding Luke in one arm, the baby's face now rosy and alert. She was pale, but standing tall. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a rough ponytail. She looked at the rescue team with tired, cautious eyes. One of the rescue medics, a younger woman named Janelle, stepped forward. She had short auburn hair tucked beneath her beanie and a firm, professional tone. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions and examine the baby. Is that okay?" Madison nodded, her voice barely audible. "Just help us stay together. That's all I ask." The tension in the air was palpable when the team radioed in the situation. Madison's ID was outdated. She had no formal record of residency, and the story found half frozen in the wilderness, a child, a baby, and a stranger, raised more questions than it answered. One of the officers quietly asked if they suspected abuse or neglect. Ramirez stepped in before Eli could speak. "Sir, with all due respect," he said into the radio, "this man saved my life twice, and I trust his judgment more than anyone's." They ran background checks on the spot. Eli handed over photocopies of Madison's medical records, her social security card slightly water-damaged, and the notarized custody paper she had on Luke and Harper. It was enough. Barely. What helped most was Harper. She sat beside Janelle, answering every question with quiet clarity. She described the storm, the cabin, how Eli had made them warm again. She even mentioned Birtta, how the dog never left Luke's side. Her tone was calm but passionate, like someone telling a sacred story. The team stood down. An hour later, a second chopper arrived with supplies and a social worker from the nearby town of Pine Hollow. Her name was Claire Dorsey, a woman in her 50s with soft gray curls, thick gloves, and an old camera hanging around her neck. Claire was sharp but kind. She interviewed Madison while letting Luke nap in her lap. "You were reported missing," she explained. "Your name's been on a regional bulletin for weeks now. Your aunt in Colorado called it in." Madison looked stunned. "My Aunt June? I thought she stopped looking for me." "She didn't," Claire said. "She's the one who pushed the search this far north." Eli, meanwhile, helped Ramirez and the team load some of their supplies into his shed. The medic left them a backup generator and a case of heating blankets. When Ramirez shook Eli's hand again, it was tight, emotional. "You never stopped being a soldier, sir," he said, voice hoarse. "You just changed your battlefield." As they prepared to lift off, Claire spoke to Madison again. "We can help you resettle in Pine Hollow," she said. "There's a small cottage owned by the fire department. It's vacant, used for emergencies. You'll have warmth, food, a pediatrician, and time." Madison blinked, tears threatening. You'd do that for us? You saved your children, Claire said. Let someone else carry the next load. That night, as the rescue chopper disappeared over the trees and the last echoes of the bell faded into the twilight, Harper stood in the doorway again, watching the trees sway. Birtta joined her. The dog nudged her hand gently, then lay down at her feet. I think we're going to be okay now, Harper whispered. Aren't we, girl? Birtta didn't answer, but her eyes, glowing amber in the twilight, held the kind of certainty only a creature of the forest could carry. The snow had thinned, giving way to the kind of sunlight that shimmered faintly on wet roofs and left behind the scent of pine sap and thawing earth. A hush still clung to the forest, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was peace, seasoned with memory. Several weeks had passed since the rescue, and life, in its slow and hesitant way, had begun to unfurl again. Pine Hollow's emergency cottage was modest, nestled on the edge of the woods near a slow-moving creek. The structure, once used to house visiting fire marshals, now held the beginnings of a new family. Inside, light filtered through gingham curtains, and the walls bore crayon sketches. Harper's drawings of Birtta, the cabin, and a woman with a harmonica, always drawn in blue. Madison had returned to teaching. She sat at a salvaged oak desk, her laptop perched on a pile of donated books, earbuds in place as she guided children through fractions and fables. Her voice, once timid, now steadier, floated through the little home like a balm. She wore her old floral blouse again, newly ironed and patched at the elbow. The Madison of months ago, shivering and silent in the snow, seemed like a ghost from a life someone else had lived. Luke cooed softly in a crib beside her, now plump with health, cheeks round and pink. A faded birthday crown made of construction paper sat askew on his head, Harper's handiwork. Harper had taken to her new surroundings with the flexible resilience only children possessed. She attended the local library's story hour, where she stunned volunteers by quietly correcting fairy tale details and asking if wolves could truly change sides. On weekends, though, she would gather her things into a canvas bag drawings, a jar of jam, sometimes her harmonica, and insist on returning to the cabin. Every Saturday, without fail, Eli came to fetch her. That morning, he had arrived in the same rusty pickup, patched with duct tape and kindness. Birtta sat in the bed of the truck, tongue lolling, eyes glowing with quiet contentment. Harper greeted them both barefoot, despite the still-chilled ground. As they bounced back up the dirt trail to the cabin, Harper chattered about everything and nothing: Miss June's piano recital, the owl she spotted near the school fence, the poem she was writing called Birtta and the Blizzard. Eli, behind the wheel, nodded and smiled, occasionally adding, "That owl's been there since before I was born," or "Birtta might have scared off the blizzard herself." The cabin had changed in small but profound ways. New firewood was stacked neatly under the eaves. A second rocking chair sat on the porch, one Eli had found discarded and restored. But the most telling addition was the wooden sign, carved by hand and burned with care, hanging by two thick nails above the doorframe. It read, "Home is who we survive with." Inside, the walls had been scrubbed, and the windows now had curtains stitched by Madison in late evenings. A shelf had been added in the main room, lined with jars of pickles and spice, gifts from Pine Hollow's townsfolk. Eli's harmonica rested atop the mantel, dusted clean but rarely touched, until today. Luke's first birthday was a small, sacred gathering. Madison carried the baby in, dressed in a white knit outfit gifted by Claire Dorsey, the social worker, who dropped in once a month with her camera and warm muffins. Harper placed the birthday crown on Luke's head again and declared, "He's not a baby anymore, he's a storm survivor now." Madison chuckled, her eyes glossy with love. The cake was a crooked apple tart made from Eli's pantry goods, and the candles were two stubby ones stuck into the crust. Harper lit them with Eli's old lighter, tongue stuck out in concentration. As the room warmed with laughter, Birtta trotted over wearing a paper party hat, poorly fastened behind one ear. She sat beside Luke's high chair and barked once, solemn and proud. Then, as the candles flickered, Harper nodded at Eli. "Your turn, Grandpa." Eli blinked. He hadn't been called that before, not seriously. He reached for the harmonica slowly, like it was something fragile and sacred. The metal felt cool and familiar. The same model his wife had bought him in 1981, engraved on the side with "Play me when you miss her." He played. The first few notes were uneven, unsure, But then the melody settled into a slow waltz, melancholy and beautiful. It was a tune he had written for his wife the night before he deployed. For 15 years he hadn't had the strength to play it again. But here, surrounded by new life and second chances, the music filled the cabin with aching warmth. Madison closed her eyes, holding Luke close to her chest. Harper rested her head on Birtta's side, one hand idly stroking the dog's ear. When the music ended, silence returned, not empty, but full. Later that night, Madison sat at the small sewing table beside the fire. In her lap lay the red dress, the one Harper wore the day they were found. The fabric was frayed, the hem torn from branches, and faint blood still marked one cuff. Carefully, she threaded the needle. Each stitch was a memory, each patch a declaration. We survived. She added a small note, tucked inside the folded cloth. To Harper, so you'll always remember the girl who never gave up. Outside, snow began to fall again, light, almost dancing. In the forest beyond, wolves howled, not in hunger, but in song. And inside the cabin, the girl, the dog, and the man who had thought he was finished slept under one roof, no bloodline, no shared last names, just a bond stronger than either. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels, but with the sound of a child's laugh in a warm cabin, the steady breath of a loyal dog, or the trembling hands of a man who thought he had nothing left to give. God doesn't always calm the storm sometimes. He sends someone to walk through it with you. Eli, Madison, Harper, and little Luke found each other not through blood, but through grace. And in that grace, they built something sacred, a home made not of bricks, but of love, loyalty, and the courage to begin again. If you believe in second chances, in the power of kindness, and in the quiet ways God moves through our lives, share this story with someone who needs a little light today. Leave a comment, subscribe for more real-life miracles, and let us pray together that God blesses all who are lost, cold, or afraid. Type Amen. If you believe that family is not always who we are born with, but who God sends when we need them most.